Okay, so this is my first time trying this with a microphone. So can everybody hear me okay? Wonderful. My name is Trena. This is the class on shadow work. I'm going to start with my story first. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, was 340 pounds. I was dying of multiple autoimmune diseases, MS being the most debilitating of them. Through a lot of, some of it work that was what you would expect. I went on a whole food plant-based diet. I decided, you know what? I'm worthy and deserve and want to live, which is where shadow work comes in. Now, I was in a relationship I would have characterized as abusive at the time. I wasn't being hit, but it was one of those relationships that we should have split a long time before. I stayed for the children, but all I was doing was being a buffer between his anger and the children. I had completely lost any sense of myself, and I internalized everything, which then manifested as the autoimmunes, which are literally your body abusing itself. Now, what happened was I connected with another soul and realized I had value. Now, at that point, I was in a wheelchair if I left the house. I occasionally was choking on my own food, which is a sign of the beginning of the end with MS. But making that choice that I wanted to live, even though I had no idea how to thrive yet, how to really live, I just wanted to survive. And actually, COVID, funny enough, I credit a bit with saving my life. Because when my doctor said to me, don't go out and don't catch it, because I was on immunosuppressant medicine for the MS, I suddenly actually went, for the first time in 8 years, I don't think I want to die. And that was when I believe I manifested my partner that I'm with now. Because when we connected, he was the one who made me feel that I had value. Despite society saying, you're in a wheelchair and 340 pounds, you're just a drain on society. And realizing, okay, I want to live. That's the first step. But the second step is deciding you deserve to live. And honestly, that is a lot harder for most of us than we realize, because we feel that we're not worthy because of things that we, I don't want to say messed up, because there are no mistakes. It was always part of getting you where you are now. But we sit there and we tell ourselves, I'm an idiot, I messed this up, I didn't do this correctly. And it can really, really wear on your health. All because we don't consider ourselves worthy of the wonderful life we can have. Now, what helps you get to the worthy feeling is shadow work. The first thing with shadow work is recognizing your flags. Flags are an emotional reaction to something. You don't want to auto-react, but we live our life on autopilot. You want to consciously react to something. The example I really like to use for this is what's called the mirror trick. When, say, your mom says, I need you to do something at a time that's really inconvenient for you. Well, you'll get upset and go, my mom doesn't respect my time. But look at that on yourself and go, take the other person out of it. I'm mad at my mom becomes I'm mad at myself for not respecting my time. Because it's never the other person. Because if your time is valuable, speak up and tell your mom that my time is valuable and I need to have that respected. Because again, it always comes back to you, and maybe there's a reason you feel you can't tell your mom. Well, then you have a deeper shadow to look at. Why do I not feel that I'm an important enough being to speak my truth and tell my mom that my time is valuable? Because, again, it is never the other person, but these shadows become very difficult sometimes to look at, because you also gain with it the knowledge that we are all ultimately responsible for our own happiness. We take the good and the bad responsibility. When you realize that you have the power to change your reactions to things, it changes everything. A great thing with shadow work is to look for the flags. Now, you may look at a situation and say, you know what? That was a justified reaction. I've looked at it. I don't feel like it's a flag. That's great. But say some guy cut you out and you're like, I want him dead. That might be a slightly excessive reaction to somebody just cutting you out in traffic. So you think to yourself, as a flag, why did that upset me so much? No, it could be that you were supposed to become your high school quarterback and you had had this dream that you were going to go to the NFL. And you've spent your whole life internalizing that your life was stolen from you because of this car accident. So someone being reckless on the road will trigger that irrational level of response. Now what we do is we have these shadows and we go, I'm over it. Like maybe the thing is being a quarterback, you were over it, you thought. But it still affects you subconsciously. It still affects your health until you look at it and consciously let it go, which is the next step. Go back to, okay, I'm irrationally angry for this reason. So now you can look at it very clearly and say, but how did my life turn out? What were the chances you were really going to get drafted in the NFL because you missed being able to be your high school quarterback because of this car accident? Probably not very high. But you may have a great family and a wonderful, career as an engineer that you wouldn't have done. And you can look at it now and say, you know what? I can let go of that anger. And then this is the most important part, or at least I feel one of the most important parts because it has helped me immensely. Forgive yourself. You can't know then what you know now. It's like expecting the kindergartner to understand your high school material. Kindergartner you didn't get it. Now, doing your shadow work releases a lot of wonderful things in your life. I often talk about, which may surprise people, but it has proven very helpful in this. My father sexually molested me in 4th grade. Guess what? I have no negative emotion about it anymore because I looked at it, I did my shadow work. I was able to forgive him because, for the same reason, you can't blame a kindergartner, there was obviously his own traumas, the way he was treated when he was little. Things that caused, because a person who is healthy doesn't do that to a 4th grader. Well then, if he was not able to control that because of his traumas, I can't be mad at him. I'm not going to go make amends and give him a hug, because you also don't need to go back to the person that hurt you. You just have to be okay with yourself. Now, the deeper part of the thing with my father was that months after I forgave him, I realized I hadn't forgiven myself. I was in 4th grade, and yet I thought it was my fault. I was too sexual because the way I dealt with it as I got older was I became promiscuous. So then I was putting 16 to 18-year-old me on top of 11-year-old me. And I was blaming 11-year-old me that I must have asked for it. I was being too sexy. I was able, through the shadow work, to have a reaction to something and go, oh my God, what 4th grader would I blame for that? But I did it to myself, which caused me, again, autoimmunes and all the things because I was self-flagellating inside. So when you do the shadow work, the important steps are look for those flags. Look for the places where you're reacting instead of acting. Where someone says something and it's a knee-jerk reaction and you're thinking, wow, that was a bit more of a bitch than I planned to be. But it happens because of these emotional flags. Any negative emotion can be looked at. And by the way, the positive emotion is just as true, except you're not trying to clear them. But when you get a ridiculous sense of euphoria over something that reminds you of something good, it's the same process, except those blisses are what we want to hold on to. They're what make life worth living. You smell apple pie, you think of your grandmother, and it's a pleasant thing. It's the same mechanism. But in the shadows, you want to release them because you don't want them to affect how you're doing things, because we do so much on autopilot. I spent my son's entire high school career, he's 19 now, 4 years passed by in what felt like a couple months. And I realize now, with the work I've done since, that it's because I was living on autopilot. I was pre-programmed that this is how I responded to things. I wasn't living consciously. December 19th, I started spontaneously channeling dimensional beings. They taught me a lot about how to do the shadow work. And it is also the date that I started consciously living. The reason this is so important is because now an expo that we went to 2.5 weeks ago feels like well over a month ago. And something that happened 6 months ago might as well have been decades ago, because it really does all change. Now, doing the path of this, I no longer have MS, PCOS, fibromyalgia, or trigeminal neuralgia. Some of those supposedly aren't curable, but they're gone. So I went from being unable to literally leave my house and walk for more than a block. That's why I had the wheelchair. I had trouble feeding myself. I had incontinence issues. I mean, all the things that here I was in my late 40s going, I didn't expect this until I was 90. But I was unhappy in my relationship. I had given up completely who I was. I was mom. I was wife, even though it was an unhappy wife. And again, being able to look at the shadows, which is why I teach this, is really how you free yourself. Now, one of the hard things of it, though, is as you clear your shadows and you clear the big things in your life that, you realize are influencing you all the time, you'll see more and more smaller things, and the smaller things will bother you more. It just happened to me actually before the last expo, which was a week ago. I was in Chicago, and I don't have big shadow work coming to me anymore because I have been doing this every day, literally for months, working through. And it had probably been a couple months, since I had had something big come up, or at least a month. And the night before I had my presentation at the expo, I didn't get to sleep till 4 a.m. because I had to go through all of the exercises, because I was like, my partner is not respecting holding space for me to work through emotions I was having. So what did I do? Exactly what I'm telling you guys to do. I used the mirror trick. I am not respecting holding space for myself, which then actually led me into a whole thing about codependence, which I'm going to be doing another class, which is why boundaries are so important for empaths, because we're prone to wanting to give everything of ourselves to keep harmony. But again, another topic, but it was very important to me in that. But the shadow work journey will literally heal you. I have literally, as I said, my lesions, when they do an MRI, are gone. Now, supposedly, that's not possible, but I had lesions on both my brain and spine. Moved, hadn't been to the doctor during a whole bunch of everything. Finally got my new MRI, and she's like, you don't have MS. I'm like, well, they wouldn't have put me on dangerous drugs. I was on Tecfidera, which is what they call a disease-modifying medication. They're horrific. I mean, very, very brutal medication. And it made me pass out more than once from a full standing position, which is why I'm not a fan of it. But there I was, going, I have an MRI that says I'm healed. And I haven't needed a wheelchair in months. I still occasionally might have something that I would blame on the MS, like tripping over my own words. Well, no, maybe I'm just tripping over my own words. So when I saw the lesions were gone, I was like, oh my goodness. Now, this was after I started channeling. So, of course, they told me, this is what you're doing. You learn to heal so you can help teach others to heal. Because I thought at first, because they taught me laying on hands healing, that I was going to be a healer. And then I found out we are all our own healer. Whether or not you need someone else to be working on you depends on if you believe in that permission slip. The placebo effect is the best example of that ever. I saw something the other day that were like, if crystals heal you, it's just the placebo effect. And I went, I don't think the person that's healed cares whether you label it something that you don't think is real, the placebo effect. But the fact that people can take a sugar pill and get the same effect as a medication if they believe that that medication will cure them, they will cure themselves. It's why faith healing works. It's why any modality that resonates with you works. And so, again, I don't think they use placebo effect as like a derogatory. It's just, if you're healed, does it really matter what they label it? It's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Now, I'm trying to keep myself back to shadow work, but I do let this flow. As I said, I channel, and I had a wonderful one come out the other day in Chicago, and they've told me don't prep, so you get me at my raw. Important things to realize is everything works out for everyone. And that may be hard to believe, but we are working at becoming our higher selves. And the other thing that you will learn as you do your shadow work is the world heals with you. My youngest is trans, and there I was going, the whole world is going to be after them. They're 15 years old, and Mama Bear, I want to protect them. But through doing my shadow work, I realized I was unfairly waiting for attack from everywhere. I was expecting them to be attacked when we were at a restaurant and they would go in to use the men's room. They were assigned female at birth. I had all of this fear, which the universe is never fear. It's always love, and they have taught me this. And what happened with Deimos, that's my youngest, was I started going, why am I putting like this unhappy, fearful world when I know that I can control this? I don't know how I knew, but that's how these things work. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop seeing the world as an attacker. And I'm going to start seeing the world as a teacher. And sure enough, there we were in rural Tennessee, stopping for a place to eat. Now, all the stereotypes were in my head about this would not be a good progressive area. This would not be somewhere that my child would be welcomed. We walked into a Dunkin' Donuts, and there was a trans woman working the register. No one seemed to care. Everybody was joking with her. And I went, this is how I can allow the world to transmute into the world I want for my child, by just not putting the expectation that it's going to be a fearful and hateful place. And it changes with you. As you get rid of the shadows that bring you fear, the world stops attacking. And we have seen it shift dramatically. Timeline shifts that you would, it's those things that sound too fantastical, but an example I'll use is my partner had a gas guzzling truck when all this happened. It was like 10 to 12 miles to the gallon. And when awakening started, he was like, I can't in good conscience drive this. So we were looking, and he researched all the electric vehicles, and what he wanted was another truck if he could find an electric pickup truck. Well, the all-full electric at the time that was coming out was called the Rivian, and they said it will launch in 2024. So he's like, okay, not yet. We ended up with a Prius, which actually it's a hybrid, which is perfect because we're going through areas that don't really have chargers yet because we're traveling all over the country. The other day, we pulled up, and there was a Rivian in front of us. And we went, there can't be. They were coming out in 2024. Sure enough, we look it up, and they came out in spring of 22, which meant the whole timeline had to shift as we put ourselves in a place to say we want a world where we're not so dependent on petroleum products and all of these problems that it can cause. And the cost of it and everything else, electric is just so much better. The things started coming out sooner. So as you clear your shadows, you decide what kind of world you want. The world literally gets better. And if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the world. Because, you'll benefit anyway, because you'll have a better world, but you'll also heal. And then you'll finally, and I only say this because, and it's not applicable to everybody, but it was in my case, finally decide you deserve to heal. You are worthy. And that is a really, as I said, that's the reason shadow work's so important, is how often do we just let someone else have their way? Because, well, maybe they know better, or I screwed up. You look back at I was an idiot for doing that, and we beat ourselves up all the time over it. And if you can stop doing that, your world opens up for you in healing, in opportunities. But the most important is in happiness. Because everything is about the perspective you're at. I mean, why do you hold on, this is the best way I ever heard it put. I wanted a good analogy that would work well for you. Is, say you're about to get a 3-foot blizzard. You can either learn to love snow or be miserable. But either way, you're getting 3 feet of snow. And that's how life is. If you learn to look at everything as an opportunity, as something to teach you, everything changes. And as you get rid of shadow work, by the way, the most beautiful thing, now I do shadow work with people because I now consider it my gift, but I used to consider it my curse, was people come up to me and tell me their entire life story. And I'm talking things that should not normally be spoken aloud because of incrimination sometimes. And my guides, when I started channeling them, told me, no, that's your gift. I hold space for people. People tell me their deepest, darkest, and I don't give them their answers. They find them by talking through me, because I never know someone else's answer. Their higher self does. I just help them learn how to tune into it. And I'm not sure where I was going with that, but that's okay. Oh, yes. I'm glad. Thank you for reminding me. The shadow work. The most beautiful thing to me is when I'm working with someone or just having a random conversation with someone at the table. And one of those triggers will come out. It'll hit them, something in the conversation, and they will cry the most beautiful tears. If you have ever released a shadow, it is an emotional purge beyond anything I can explain. Because normally we think of crying as a bad thing. You know, I shouldn't be weak. Why am I crying? Why is this upsetting me? But if you're looking at it and you know why you're crying, you know what you're letting go, you actually get to release it. And it is, you feel your vibration raise, you feel everything change by releasing that shadow. And so crying, don't suppress it when it happens, especially with your shadow work. Embrace it, because that is your healing. All the purges are good. Emotional purges, physical purges are always you getting rid of something that didn't serve you. I've heard the term, people always say, you know, release that which does not serve you. And it's gotten kind of used to the point where, like namaste, people don't know what it means anymore. But one of the things shadow work helped teach me is even those we thought were our enemies are here to be our teachers. They're to show us what we don't prefer. And by doing the release that which does not serve you, I started, when I was first doing it, it was like, get rid of everything that doesn't serve me. And now I'm like, release whatever doesn't serve me. Thank it for being in my life. Because again, like my father, would I ever wish someone to go through being molested in 4th grade? No. But I meet women all the time. Actually, not just women, mostly women, but not just women, that have had stories like that. And the fact that I was there was needed for me to be able to help them. Because it's harder when you're working with someone else to release the shadow that you think they're not going to understand. And because I have been there, because I understand, because I've healed from it and can talk about it openly in groups without it bothering me at all, I help them release it. So I am actually thankful that I went through that, as odd as that may sound, because it has allowed me to heal people in a way, for them to heal themselves, but facilitate healing people in a way that I never would have if I hadn't experienced that. Now, here is how shadow work can change other people and change the world. My ex, he was my best friend as a teenager. We probably should have never gone together, but the universe works the way it does. I have 2 wonderful children that I adore because of it, but we were very unhappy towards the end. And towards the end, we were married 23 years, and I'd say at least 15 of them were not happy, and the last 10 were pretty brutal. And it was because I was just a victim in his own war against himself. Once I was away, working through my own stuff, I could realize that it was never personal. He wasn't making my life hell because he wanted to make my life hell. He was making my life hell because he was making his own life hell, and I was just along for the ride. But of course I didn't realize that at the time. So I had lots of anger, everything else to work through. When I started doing my shadow work, went through lots of things, and of course the ex comes up when you're doing shadow work. After a few months of working on it, so don't think this was like an overnight, process. I said, you know what? I release you. Not to him. This was all internal. I don't need you to be my bad guy anymore. I don't need you to be my villain. I learned to stand up for myself. I left disabled with 2 children who are on the autism spectrum because I had said I deserve more and I'm enough. I found my voice. So you don't need to be my bad guy anymore. And I am not exaggerating to say it was no more than 48 hours later, he contacted me, said something about how he had been going to therapy and he just wanted to apologize, stay friendly, but, it was a huge step from where it had been. All by releasing him. Now, my youngest, who had chronic PTSD diagnosed from his angry outbursts. Again, not that he was physically violent, and I want to clarify that because it is important in our society. But because he was never happy, he was always angry, and particularly those more empathetic among the family struggled a lot, feeling that constant, we're not doing anything right and he's not happy. All of that changed when I did my shadow work and released him from needing to be my bad guy. Then, not too long ago, I did the same thing with my child because I realized my 15-year-old, the trans boy, was my mirror. Because they have visions, they talk to other people. I had been a medium when I was a little kid. Squashed it away because I didn't want to be the freak and I wanted to be more normal. Which is kind of funny, by the way, if you knew me, because I was very goth, so it was not particularly normal looking, but I still didn't want to be the one who was talking to ghosts. Then I started channeling, as I said, this past December 19th, and so I guess I am still doing that now. But my child has the same gifts. They also have a ton of medical issues. They're always in pain, just like I was when I was a child, and they always said I was a hypochondriac. Although then I got diagnosed with all the things, and so they were my mirror. And I realized the reason they were suffering is, and the universe never deliberately makes you suffer, but they have to give enough counter pressure to bring you to the realizations you need. And they brought me to the realization that Deimos was my mirror, and I said the same thing I did with my ex. I said, I release you from needing to do that because I'm looking at it now. I am looking and I'm saying, I was the child who felt ignored because I was in so much pain. I was never believed that I was in so much pain. Thank you for making me look at it. I don't need you to serve that purpose anymore. And I did this. It was probably a couple hours of working through a lot of, we're talking things from 30 years ago. More than 30 years ago. I'm 49. So we'll say 40 years ago. Things from back then that I was looking at. And I released them from it. Now, they're usually living with my ex now, which is what the shadow work did, by the way. By releasing him, they wanted to live with him, at least part-time, and see him and have him in their life, which was completely life-changing. So then more recently, I did the shadow work, and I released them from needing to be my mirror, needing to help me see where I felt I was a victim, where I felt I was suffering. And we saw them 2 days later, and they were so much more optimistic and bubbly than I have ever seen them. And you know what? I get rid of the ego of needing to be the good parent, and my ex was the bad parent, and I'm thrilled. I don't care what it is that made them happy. But they are, finally. And that was because I was able to let go of needing them to show me where I was unhappy, where I felt victimized. That, by the way, the victim paradox, is so much of what makes this difficult in the world. We feel the world's attacking us. It's always out to get us. Everything's unfair. And if you can get rid of needing to see it as fair or not, you get rid of the justification of attacking them. Well, it's okay for me to attack them because they shot me a dirty look. Maybe they didn't shoot you a dirty look. We had this happen, actually. We went to a restaurant, and the woman was a little short, you know? And I didn't really think much of it. I said, she's probably just having a bad day, because I worked retail and service industry and stuff. My partner, who hasn't, went, oh, she was kind of rude, you know? And I was like, yeah. And then, we both let it go. Sure enough, during the time we're there, we find out she's got a newborn daughter. She's not sleeping, and then she ended up short-staffed at the restaurant. It was never personal to us. But without knowing, if we had just gone for pickup, gotten her shortness and left, we would have thought, what a terrible person. And people have the same thing for us. I mean, I try to be a loving, caring person, hold the door open for people, but I know there have been times in my life that I've been short-tempered. I've spoken tersely to somebody, or sometimes I had the mouth of a truck driver with Tourette's, so very rudely to somebody. In that person's life, I could save puppies every day for my job, because I love them and I just want to save the world. But because of that one interaction, I'm a villain in that person's life. Because you only know how much they're in your universe. And what I mean by that is when someone walks up that you've never met before, they didn't exist to you until that moment. Because you only have as far as you perceive out. And so by going, you know what? This is only a little snippet of their entire life. Every person here is a full tapestry of all the rich depth that you have in your life. The people who love you, the people you love, the struggles at work, or, the causes you really believe in, they have those too. And for me, one of the most beautiful things to remember is that even the bad guys are still there for our benefit. I try not to get into anything political, but I will say an example, because it's the best one I can think of that, is Roe versus Wade. When that got overturned, there was a lot of anger. But the bad guys who outlawed it brought the positive swell force in the other direction. And so even though what they did was, at least, and again to me, because everybody, it's your perception, was a negative, that negative was needed to drive a wave of women that were saying, no, divine feminine's coming back, I've had enough. But that couldn't have happened without the villain. We would have put up with it forever. We really would have, because divine feminine is a peacekeeper. We like to make everybody happy. We give of ourselves to keep everybody happy. And I do want to stress divine feminine and divine male for me are not always body matching. In fact, surprisingly large amount of the time, it's not. I know many people in a female body that are what we call the integrator, which is more the divine male, the logic thinker, the one who knows how to make the plans and get from point A to point B in the best way possible. And then I've known not as many, but quite a few males in body that were more what we call the intuitive. The feeler, the one that senses, this feels right, go with your gut. We all have both to different levels. We work with same-sex couples, but I will tell you, one of them is always stronger integrator, and one of them is always stronger intuitive. The bodies have nothing to do with it, except that it's more likely. And I think some of the more likely may be because of society shaping that it's okay for women to cry, it's not okay for men to cry, men should use their brains, all those sorts of things. So I do believe society has a lot to do with that. I think, actually, I'll recap real quick on how you do the shadow work again, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the way to do shadow work yourself is, one, notice when you're reacting to something in a way that you didn't even get a chance to think about, feel about, you just had a knee-jerk reaction to it, particularly if it's negative. And say, okay, there's my flag. That made me angry. Why did that make me angry? And think through it honestly with yourself and say, I'm angry because I feel this person disrespected that. Then use the mirror trick to say, well, why? And that, again, that was turning the example with using your mom for the not respecting your time. You know, instead of saying, because this person didn't respect this about me, go, why am I not respecting this about me? Because if you really held that part of yourself in respect, you would speak up. You would not let them break that boundary. But instead, we usually hold it in. And that feeling of